And we're tracking a Senate vote that could come this very hour as the Biden White House is eyeing a breakthrough, they say, on the jobs and infrastructure deal. Indeed, we have a very special, high-ranking guest from the Biden administration joining us later this hour. We start right now, though, with the quest for accountability for this Capitol riot. New heat on Republicans as those police officers' stark testimony is sinking in across the nation. Meanwhile, one of Donald Trump's most intense defenders in Congress, Jim Jordan, who was not allowed on the committee, seeming to now suggest that he talked with Trump on that fateful day.
Did you talk to the former president that day?
I've talked to the former president umpteen times, thousands, I mean not thousands
on
times,
January
countless times. I talked to the president. I never talk about what we talk about because I just don't think that's appropriate, just like I don't talk about what happens in Republican conferences. So I've talked to the president numerous times. I continue to talk to the president since he's left office.
On January 6th, Congressman.
Yes, I've talked to the president. I've talked to the president so many, I can't remember all the days I've talked to him, but I've certainly talked to the president.
Now, amidst some kind of hedging there, Jordan does sound pretty clear that they did talk, which raised questions about whether this was during the violence, so memorably caught on tape. Did Trump reveal more of his actions in real time? We're now looking at a former president under criminal investigation for efforts to overturn the election that made him an ex-president. So Jordan's firsthand account could make Congressman Jordan a relevant witness for this House committee or that open criminal probe in Georgia. As for yesterday's hearing, Jordan is one of several Republicans trying this out, saying, well, he missed it while working. The top House Republican, Kevin McCarthy, hitting a similar theme. And same for the Senate leader of the Republican Party, Mitch McConnell. Then there's the newest member of Republican leadership who was added as a more loyal Trump alternative to Liz Cheney, famously over these issues. I'm talking about Congresswoman Stefanik, who refuses to say whether she followed that committee hearing at all. Now, these answers are not exactly profiles in courage, but they matter tonight, and I'll tell you briefly why. They underscore some of the fear behind this current Republican facade over the riot and the insurrection. The truth is, Republican leaders have not figured out a coordinated plan for dealing with a probe that is very clearly damning for Trump, because while we can be as fair and legalistic as possible about the definition of incitement, he called those people to Washington. Everybody knows that. He gave them that rally and speech, and then they marched in and tried to overthrow your government and your democracy. Everybody knows that. It's also incriminating for many elected Republicans, not all, but many. Now, what did they do about all this? Well, the Republican Party tried to sabotage the hearing that everyone just saw yesterday. They lost that gambit when Pelosi booted the Jim Jordans of the world off the committee. So we didn't have half or more of the time spent on their stuff. Then the Republican Party turned to a boycott to try to argue that this probe would be automatically partisan. A talking point completely diluted by Speaker Pelosi because she just added Republicans herself. So a couple things didn't work. Now they're betting if they just say, there's nothing to see here, I was so busy at work I didn't see it, that maybe a lot of Americans will agree. Okay. But there is something to see here. It's the worst attack on our Capitol in the modern era. There is something to watch here. And there are conservatives with a lot more influence than the average Republican member of Congress who clearly get that. Over on Fox, they're not using this sort of new McCarthy-McConnell 4.0 line now that they've been outmaneuvered by Pelosi. Over on Fox News, they're not pretending they don't know what happened in that committee hearing. Indeed, these hearings were partly carried on Fox itself because they were so big they couldn't avoid them. They were also carried on several news networks, NBC, ABC. And those, as a matter of what reaches voters, those networks draw even more viewers than cable. So the Fox crowd, the people over on that network, they know Americans are hearing about this. And they're taking a different tack. They're turning on the police. They are arguing those people, those officers who risk their lives, are engaged in some kind of theater.
Democrats today picked 4 carefully curated police officers to testify as the voice of the law enforcement community.
The theatrics were intended to produce an emotional reaction. Logic and facts be damned. God save us from these third-rate theatrics. Now, the award for best use of an exaggeration in a supporting role, the winner is Aquilino Gonell, who thinks the pen is literally mightier than the sword.
Where to begin? Well, the media arm of the conservative movement, which rallied around a reality TV show star to run the country, now has a problem with theatrics. The people who claim Blue Lives Matter have decided the most important color here is actually MAGA red. Everyone knows the expression, a hit dog will holler. These riot enablers are clearly hit. They are hollering. And they understand something both obvious and tragic across America, including many conservative areas. A debate between criminal MAGA rioters and brave police officers is not even close. Which is why on this one, the police get the last word.
I recall thinking to myself, this is how I'm going to die. What I witnessed and experienced on January 6, 2021 was unlike anything I had ever seen.
Another takes a different tack, shouting, "You will die on your knees."
There was an attack carried out on January 6th, and a hitman sent them.
I'm joined now by the former RNC chairman, Michael Steele, Caddy K from Aussie Media, the Washington editor there, and from Mother Jones, David Korn. Michael, I walked through the recent history, even if it's a little depressing and monotonous, because it seems clear that the Republican leadership in Congress doesn't know how to play this. Pelosi has sort of checkmated them several times. And the media arm over at Fox, they seem to understand this is not something you can just piece out on. They seem to understand that this police testimony, if it goes far enough and continues, means something.
Yeah, and I think that's why you have the responses you have from the talking heads that you displayed in the opening part of the segment, where the only thing that was curated was their responses. We could have predicted the responses here. I mean, at the end of the day, the MAGA-loving pro-police crowd is just more MAGA-loving than they are pro-police. And the reality is setting in, not just politically having been outmaneuvered and their bluffs called several times by the Speaker of the House, but the reality of it is that this narrative exposes so much about what's rotten right now inside the core of my party. And, in addition to that, you also have let's keep up with the Newsmax crowd who's stealing our audience. So a lot of this becomes a play to kind of pull back some of those Fox viewers. But the reality still remains for Fox and a lot of these folks pushing this stuff that the rest of us see it and know it for what it is. Our eyes aren't lying to us here, folks. Right? We watched it unfold real time. I don't need Fox to describe or otherwise curate an answer for me or a response, because I saw it. And that is the hardest piece of evidence for them to come up against.
Yeah, I hear that. Caddy, let me play a little bit more from an officer here discussing, I guess, what has become this back and forth about theater and entertainment. Take a look.
What does concern me is the fact that, those entertainers have an audience, and that audience takes their words and, the rhetoric that they use as more than just entertainment. They think it's real. And that thought process has real life consequences. And we saw the results of that on January 6th.
Caddy, there's something a little, I guess it's disturbing that someone in this position has to go out here as an officer and engage on all this. I mean, I get what's happening. I also think in a way it's a sad statement about where we're at. But he's sort of doing the work through what is this committee process and through that interview I just showed to remind people that it's not all fun and games and quote-unquote rhetoric, and don't take him literally when this is the result, Caddy.
Yeah, I mean, it's depressing that these officers who went through, as they said, hell on January the 6th to defend members of Congress have to wake up to the fact that those members of Congress say they're too busy to even listen to their testimony during the hearing. I mean, the level of disrespect, just on a human, personal level, seems pretty astonishing. I mean, Officer Fanone in that interview also kind of quite rightly said, understood the theatrics of this and said that when you get people mocking the police officers for what they said during their testimony, it was a kind of an indication of weakness, really, from the other side. I mean, he said, look, I've testified before defense lawyers before, and I know in a courtroom when they start coming out with the theatrics, that's where they're on the weakest ground. And he had a full understanding of that. I just thought that the two things of mocking them and then saying, well, actually, we just didn't even have time to watch, just shows the level of disrespect that Republican members of Congress seem to be showing to these officers who gave so much on that day.
David?
Well, when I look at what's happening, it reminds me of Stalinism. Stalinism was a cult of personality, and one real big tenet of it was denial. They would airbrush people out of photos to make believe they never existed. Donald Trump cannot survive with an accurate depiction of what happened on January 6th, particularly his own role and what he did that day. He just can't survive politically with that. It's too much to have a president cheering on and doing nothing and inciting a riot. He may work with 30% of the country who are MAGA already, but he can't survive. So it has to be denied. That means these officers and their accounts have to be denied or mocked or not looked at, not given credit to. And so you have members of the Republican Party, and there was a wonderful exchange yesterday between Congressman Jamie Raskin and Congressman Clyde, right, who said that they were just tourists. When Clyde could not bring himself to say, okay, we weren't like tourists.
David, I didn't know you were going to bring that up, but our crack beat team here has that ready. So let's have you share more of your thoughts on this moment on the other side. But for those who haven't seen it, let's take a look.
Watching the TV footage of those who entered the Capitol and walked through statuary halls showed people in an orderly fashion staying between the stanchions and ropes, taking videos and pictures. If you didn't know the TV footage was a video from January 6th, you would actually think it was a normal tourist visit. Those are your words.
And I stand by that exact statement as I said it.
I mean, in 1984, the epitome of what the party does to people is that you have to say 2 + 2 is 5. Until the party can get you to say that, it hasn't fully won. And this is what Donald Trump is doing. January 6th didn't happen, or it was just tourists, or it was Antifa and BLM. It was everything but what happened. And so it's painful to see these victims who are brutalized trying to save our democracy, be challenged in this way. But I think they get it. I was very impressed. I think they know what they're up against, and to defend democracy doesn't just entail standing there in front of the hordes and physically restraining them from going after Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi and others. It also means getting out there and beating up the denialists and just saying again and again, we're fighting not just for democracy, but for reality.
Well, and that moment stood out, and Michael, that was Congressman Clyde there, who said, quote, I have it here, he said, quote, I stand by that exact statement as I said it, which is reminiscent of one of the pieces of internet culture where people say, I said what I said. But properly used, that's a phrase that affirms something that might have been a little spicy or might have offended someone, but is supposed to be a true thing, Like, I said what I said, David Corn listens to too much Bob Dylan. And then he says, how dare you? There's no such thing. And I say, I said what I said. That's the lighthearted version. The tragic version is you have a member of Congress in broad daylight amidst this hearing, amidst this news. Everyone's been reminded. The officer spoke. The video is up there. And he's doubling down on, he lied about it. He's a liar. And he's lying in the service of white nationalist terrorists who tried to overthrow democracy, who got people killed. What do you do with that?
Well, I mean, your question actually rather answers itself. I mean, if you've got nowhere to go in your lie, and it's exposed for what it is. I mean, look, I know what the congressman was saying. He was saying if you took a snapshot of that moment in time, when there was the visual of those individuals walking through the Capitol from someplace to somewhere else where they were, that particular group happened to be a little bit orderly. Yeah, you could make that case. That's what he wants us to believe. Believe that snapshot of 1 minute out of 4 hours of riotous insurrectionist behavior. So that's the narrowing, the 1984 moment he wants you to latch on to. That's the Stalinist, the sort of kind of, hey, we're going to make you feel good. To David's point, we're going to excise out of the visual the rest of the story, everything else that you're watching. Just focus on those people walking casually and orderly on their way to do destruction, on their way looking for the vice president to hang him with the scaffolds that are outside. That part of the conversation, the congressman doesn't want to acknowledge, because to acknowledge that proves his lie. And when you've got nowhere to go with your lie, the only thing you can do, baby, is hunker down and hold on, which is what you saw him do, which is the modern day version of I said what I said.
Kathy?
Yeah, what was extraordinary about the hearing yesterday was not just the officer's testimony, it was that we saw yet more new video that we hadn't seen before, which from Officer Fanone's body camera, we saw the new video of Officer Hodges having his head, crushed in that doorway. We hadn't seen some of that, and it was impossible to look at that and repeat the kinds of things that some Republican members have said in the past and have been saying today, which is why you had Republican members say, Ashley, I didn't see it. Because if you saw it, if you just watched the video, let alone listen to the testimony, let alone listen to the heartbreak of the people who had been there trying to defend members of Congress, you couldn't possibly say the things that you've been saying about January the 6th. The two images, those images don't add up with the words. So you have people saying, well, I was too busy, I was in meetings all day.
Yeah. It can't coexist, as you say. And saying you're in meetings, if you do the thought experiment, it's like, would anyone say that out loud about the 9/11 Commission or any other such national security failing where it was understood, notwithstanding other differences, that you cared about this? Because to be in government and claim not to care about it, not to even look, it would itself be deemed an abdication. Michael, Kathy, and David, thanks to each of you. Coming up, we are tracking the Senate vote as many. We are looking at the floor of the United States Senate, where senators are gathering on the floor. That itself is rare, but it's because, as you see on your screen, this key vote on the Biden jobs and infrastructure plan is coming up, and the indications are on the record that there is a breakthrough. Senate Democrats expect to bring this to the floor and get enough votes to overcome what is normally a filibuster on so much business coming out of the White House. We will be tracking that. If indeed they win or victorious, we'll bring that to you. As you can see, a lot of action on the Senate floor, and we'll be tracking when this vote comes in, whether it's this hour or later tonight here on MSNBC. As for The Beat, we want to turn back to a different series of events for Republican lawmakers. We, in our top segment tonight, covered the blowback and the scuffling over that police testimony. That all has to do with what we're learning about what happened on January 6th. There's a separate issue here, though, over Republicans accused of helping incite the riot itself. There have been allegations, of course, against Donald Trump. He was impeached over it, but also against others who spoke at that fateful Trump rally that day. Republican Congressman Mo Brooks, for example, is being sued by a Democratic colleague over the speech he gave to the crowd on that day, hours before the insurrection.
I've got a message that I need you to take to your heart and take back home, and along the way, stop at the Capitol. Today is the day American patriots start taking down names and kicking ass. Our ancestors sacrificed their blood, their sweat, their tears, their fortunes, and sometimes their lives. Are you willing to do the same. The fight begins today.
You heard the man. He's talking about kicking ass. He's talking about shedding blood, like historical examples where people shed real blood. He said the fight begins today. And we know people took him literally. Now, there are many facets to this because in America, people have broad free speech rights, even for saying things that may sound violent, as long as they don't directly incite violence. The question here, given the violence that occurred, is whether he did. Now, Brooks is running from this. He's trying to duck the whole argument. He's trying to claim he should be immune from even going to court over this because he claims what you just saw was part of his official duties as a member of Congress. Well, that's his opinion. Is he going to get very far with that? Well, he's not getting any help from the Department of Justice that often would weigh in if someone was really exercising official duties. For example, if someone did something while going to work in the administration. They say he's wrong, though. The DOJ going to court to make the point, saying they cannot conclude Brooks was acting within the scope of his office. And they go further saying, and this is important, inciting or conspiring to foment a violent attack on the Capitol is not within the scope of any federal employee. That is what is known as a legal smackdown. Indeed, I can tell you the DOJ didn't have to go that far to put it that starkly. They could have just said, we're not helping. Now, to be as fair as possible, whether or not this was incitement, whether or not this was, for example, a crime, hasn't been determined yet. That could happen in court by a judge. Now, this same suit names others: Don Jr., Giuliani, and Donald Trump himself. Now, when we were discussing this just this week on The Beat, Neil Katyal told us how the DOJ is paving the way for Trump officials to also be hauled in and be forced to testify under oath about January 6th.
These letters make it so that Justice Department officials will now have to testify or try and maybe hire personal lawyers to try and avoid testimony, which will go nowhere. And ultimately, this can lead to Donald Trump himself testifying and the former acting attorney general and the chief of staff, Mark Meadows. All these people are now potential folks who are subject. They don't have executive privilege anymore.
We hear a lot about accountability and justice. The fact is, in our system, that can take time. And we have a very special guest on this, someone who has spent many years on justice for federal officials, Nick Ackerman. We're back with him in 60 seconds. We're joined now by Nick Ackerman, a veteran Watergate prosecutor and a veteran of the famed SDNY in New York. Good to have you, sir.
Thank you. Good to be here, as usual.
That's the attitude we like. Several developments here, Nick, but this isn't the first time that people in government accused of some kind of misconduct rush to claim, hey, I was just doing my government job. There are times where that can work. It certainly can shut down certain types of inquiries. Walk us through what it means that it appears not to be working, as far as the DOJ is concerned, for Congressman Brooks.
Well, I think the best way to look at this is to compare it to the Jean Carroll situation, where the government, the Department of Justice, decided that it would continue to represent Donald Trump in that particular suit. I mean, there is a very distinct policy issue here. A president of the United States gets sued all the time. And Jean Carroll, may have a viable suit. It may be legitimate. It may not be. We can't say for sure that this rape actually happened, but it's something that a public official is subject to all the time. And I think the Department of Justice viewed it as such that they didn't want to get into making a decision on the merits of the case because a president is sued for all kinds of crazy things all of the time. On the other hand, in this particular case, there is no question that what Congressman Brooks was doing was inciting the crowd to basically storm the Capitol. He used the word blood. He used the word patriots. He used the word kicking ass. I mean, there isn't any doubt in anybody's mind, particularly when you put that in the context of what Donald Trump said and what Rudy Giuliani said about trial by combat. I mean, this whole when you put all of these people together in terms of what they were saying to this crowd, they were basically inciting them to go up to the Capitol and riot the place. It's exactly what they did. What they said is what you expected to be the end result. Obviously, the Department of Justice is not going to defend somebody who's trying to overthrow the United States government. I mean, that in itself seems to me to be a pretty common sense notion. That if someone came at you, tried to murder you and missed, and just shot you in the arm, you're not going to fund his legal battle. You're not going to give him lawyers so he can defend himself against you when you're going to sue him for doing that. Well, it's the same thing here. I mean, this is the most extreme case of somebody being involved in an insurrection to overthrow the government, to stop our constitutional process of counting the votes for president because they didn't like who was elected. So under these circumstances, it would have been absolutely crazy in the extreme for the Department of Justice to represent Congressman Brooks.
And so what does he face in court now?
Well, I think what he's going to face is depositions. That's going to be the start of this. There's going to be discovery. He's going to be deposed. Donald Trump will be deposed. Rudy Giuliani will be deposed. And they don't really have much of a defense here. And I think that the more they can dig into the evidence showing that Trump, Giuliani, Brooks knew that these people had come up, knew that these people were looking for a fight, the more they can show that, the more they can show that what they were doing was inciting this riot. I mean, I am totally convinced that once they start digging into phone records, they find out who these people were meeting with. If Congressman Brooks was meeting with, the 3 percenters or the Proud Boys, he's going to have a hard time trying to argue that he was doing this in his duty as a congressman. I mean, your duty as a congressman is not to try and overthrow the Congress and stop their regular business. I mean, that is just not going to fly well with a jury in the District of Columbia.
Yeah, it's one of the dumber things I've heard, and I do this for a living, so I hear all kinds of stuff, Nick. But the Brooks defense is like someone accused of embezzling from their own bank and saying that's part of my official duties, which just brings you back to, no, you're accused of embezzlement, which is abdicating your duties to steal for yourself. As you say, he's not defending the Congress, he's trying to overthrow it. I did want to get your view on the other issue I mentioned with Neil Katyal, which relates as well to these open probes, that there is mounting pressure on different members of the administration to have to testify. The DOJ, they're also not giving, for example, former Acting Attorney General Rosen any kind of privilege because they don't deem a potential coup as the kind of machinations that are privileged. What else could we learn about that? Because it seems that the fact that this all didn't work has also colored some people's perspective, even though we all know that attempted murder is bad, as you just alluded to. And so the fact that Donald Trump reportedly was not only doing the outside game of the rally, if you will, and the insurrection, but the inside game of trying to get people inside the government to pull off a coup. He just didn't succeed.
Right, but I think what we're going to find is people coming in with all kinds of firsthand conversations with Donald Trump or people around Donald Trump that are going to put together a jigsaw puzzle of putting in all these pieces that show exactly what Donald Trump was doing minute by minute, day by day, with respect to what occurred right from the beginning, when he called people in, when he encouraged people to show up in Washington to this Stop the Steal rally, which was really geared towards trying to stop a constitutional process of counting votes for the President of the United States. I think that once you have those people and they've got to testify truthfully, you're going to get a lot of evidence that could wind up turning into ultimately a criminal case against Donald Trump, Congressman Brooks, and Rudy Giuliani. That's what I think is the ultimate end game here. Once you put all of these pieces together, particularly when you don't have the privilege to hide behind. And that's pretty classic. I mean, the idea that you can claim privilege when the conversations were essentially in furtherance of criminal activity, in this case to overthrow the government, I don't think that there's any question that people are going to be forced to testify, and the only privilege they have is to assert their Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination.
All clearly put. Nick Ackerman, thank you as always for the legal insights. When we come back, we're looking at this